South Korea's president caught in a scandal and fighting for her political life. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. More than 100,000 South Koreans are expected to take to the streets in protest this weekend as demands for the resignation of President Park Geun-hye continue. Park is embroiled in an influence peddling scandal that's seriously threatening her position as leader of South Korea. The crisis focuses on Park's longtime friend and confidant, Choi Soon-sil, who has been charged with meddling in state affairs. She's also allegedly abused her relationship with the president for personal gain. President Park has already apologized to the nation for showing her friend drafts of speeches.
I did it with a sincere intention to be more meticulous in looking over things. But whatever the intention was, I am sorry. I have caused concern among the people and caused alarm and heartache. I deeply apologize to our nation.
Tens of thousands have taken part in protest rallies over the last 2 weekends, calling on the president to step aside. And that pressure looks set to grow even more this weekend. To discuss all of this, joining us now via Skype from Seoul, Jin Kai. He's a lecturer at the Graduate School of International Studies at Yonsei University in South Korea. Also with us here in the studio is Eun-jung Lim. She is a lecturer in Korea Studies at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. From Beijing, we're joined by Aina Tanjin. He is an international affairs commentator and advises the Chinese government. Also joining us in the studio is Ji Abby Lee. She is a social media reporter with the Voice of America and travels frequently to South Korea. Welcome to all of you to the show. Eun-jung, let's start with this scandal. How did it start?
It's a very complicating scandal, so that is why probably worldwide now people are trying to figure out what's going on there. Probably in terms of just corruption pattern, it might be not that different. I mean, it might not be that different from any of those previous experiences. But this time, unusually or unprecedentedly, this lady, Miss Choi Soon-sil, she is not actually affiliated with any governmental position. And another thing is she is not a well-known kind of expert in any specific field. So that might be the key distinction between any previous corruption-related issues and this specific scandal.
Right. So who is Choi Soon-sil? Is she just a confidant, a friend of the president?
They had built up this kind of friendship for more than decades, almost like 4 decades, but they knew each other through Ms. Choi Soon-sil's father, Pastor Choi Tae-min. Many media actually criticized him as a kind of, Rasputin, who was like manipulating. Back then, I mean, the first daughter, Park Geun-hye, of the President Park Chung-hee,
right,
who was the kind of absolute dictator at the time.
The accusation is that she has been too close to the president and has been making decisions or influencing decisions that the president has been making.
Yes, that is why now South Korean people are that frustrated. We didn't expect that our president was like manipulated or played by another person who is trying to hide herself actually behind the curtain. But I personally don't think Ms. Choi Soon-sil was like manipulating everything. Rather than that, probably from President Park Geun-hye's point of view, Ms. Choi has been like almost the only friend or the only person who she can rely on, because if you think about all this tragedy, President Park Geun-hye, her father was assassinated or her mother was killed by another like assassins too. So thanks to all this tragedy, probably she shut down her minds to anybody else.
You think there's an element of sexism here?
Oh, yes, nowadays it looks like more Western medias or even political scientists also talk about that.
Okay.
But I don't want to exaggerate that side too much.
Okay, let's bring in Jin Kai from Seoul. And Jin Kai, the president has been accused, she's also been accused of undermining the Constitution. And as you watch this crisis unfold in South Korea, I mean, is she going to be forced to resign, or do you think she can survive this crisis?
Well, in brief, the ongoing crisis has brought huge challenges to not only the President Park Geun-hye, but also to the ruling party and the opposition party and the general public. So I mean, simply think about the previous decisions and proposals she has made in the past year, in the timeline, going to China's military parade, and decide to deploy staff and propose to revise constitution. But it's not quite clear whether she will be forced to resign or not. So the ruling party actually has indicated reconciliation among different groups in National Assembly. So I think it will be too hasty and risky to force President Park to resign immediately.
Gee, there have already been protests in South Korea. Thousands of people have taken to the streets to protest against the president. There's even a bigger protest planned for this weekend.
Right.
What exactly are the protesters calling for?
So they are still calling for her to resign and for her impeachment, but that's highly unlikely, like he just mentioned, because it's a very complicated process, and also it's only a year before the next presidential election. So I think the left wing will probably want to let it ride as long as possible, and then when people's anger is still fresh, they'll try to have the next presidential election and then elect the president they want.
So she'll be allowed to see her term. What's it, 15 months left, right?
That's right. A little over a year, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ina, how closely are these events in South Korea being watched by China? What are China's concerns here?
Well, China has a number of concerns. There's been some flashpoints that have gone on, overfishing, over THAAD, over the decision to share intelligence with the Japanese. These things are all leading towards a situation of uncertainty. Add on to that the situation in the U.S. with Trump, and you have a very toxic mix. All sides are looking for what is going to be happening in the future.
Eun-jung, President Park has already apologized. In fact, she's apologized twice to the nation, and she said that she's prepared to accept an investigation, a direct investigation of herself. Let's take a listen to what she had to say. Let's watch.
These latest developments are all my fault and were caused by my carelessness.
She also said that she was perhaps over-trusting in her relationship with her friend. How are South Koreans responding to the apologies?
Again, her second apology, to be honest, sounds very sincere.
Right.
There might be a kind of general perception or impression, but the thing is, probably that's not what we wanted to hear from our national leader. Rather than just apologizing sincerely, or rather than just showing her that kind of sadness or whatever, those feeling betrayed by the closest friend or whatever, rather than that kind of personal expression, rather than that, we strongly wanted to hear more decisive decision by the nation's top, by the country's top figure, the top head. So that is why probably people got much more angrier actually than before. The second apology stimulated actually more. So that is why we observed that massive protest last week. So again, this weekend can be another threshold, whether or not I don't know how many people can be gathering together, but probably many people assume that this weekend can be really threshold for the incumbent government. So let's take a look.
Jin Kai, if we look beyond South Korea and look at the impact these events in the country are having in the region, a question I just put to Ina as well. How do you think this is impacting the relationship with China?
Well, I think only if President Park chooses to resign under pressure, that will create, certainly uncertainty for South Korea's domestic politics, and that's to its relations to countries like China. And the point is, there are few potential candidates for next year's presidential election, such as Kim Woo-sung and Ban Ki-moon and Ahn Cheol-soo, but it's not clear who has the biggest chance. So the chance is that President Park takes the back seat, and still China has to face a relatively weaker president, but maybe a relatively more strong prime minister in the future.
Gee, President Park made history when she became the country's first female president, and she came to power on an anti-corruption ticket.
Right.
The fact that she hasn't accomplished much in that regard, is that perhaps driving the opposition as well.
That's true. And I think the feeling of betrayal is probably the most prominent sentiment that South Koreans are feeling, because the previous presidential scandals all involved some kind of family members, right? Their brothers or their sons. But this time people are thinking, well, she doesn't have any family members apart from her estranged siblings. That should be okay. But it actually kind of became even more of a shock, because predictability is somewhat comforting, right? And then $70 million is a lot of money, but it's not some kind of amount that South Koreans have not seen. But this time it's just $70 million, and it involves someone who is completely unrelated to her in any, not a blood relationship, and is also a daughter of a cult leader. I mean, you can't make this kind of stuff up. It's like a page out of a South Korean drama script. There is that tragic family history, and then there is this Rasputin, and then there's this money and power. It's really mind-boggling to a lot of people.
As you point out, President Park, there is a tragic past here. How do people see that? Is there any sympathy for her?
Yeah, so the right wing definitely felt, okay, her dad is known as a dictator, but people do not entirely detest him, because during his leadership, the economy prospered a lot. So they were hoping that, yeah, she is a daughter of him, so she must be doing something good for the country, but it turns out that wasn't the case. And like actually Eun-jung mentioned in one of her articles, people thought of her as this Iron Lady, but turned out to be more of a Rapunzel than an Iron Lady, and that, I think, was a huge disappointment for a lot of people.
Aina, Seoul's foreign ministry has said that President Park will not be attending the Asia-Pacific leaders meeting, which is going to take place in Peru later this month. That meeting was supposed to discuss, and will, of course, will be discussing the security situation on the Korean Peninsula. What do these events in South Korea mean for security in the region?
Well, as I said earlier, it's about having a lot of unpredictability going in. It's quite possible that North Korea will try some sort of gambit to test the resolve of either South Korea and the U.S., especially since you have this weakness in Trump in the United States. So it's a toxic mix at this point, and it requires strong leadership, but you don't have that. So I think she's going to have to resign either in fact or step back completely and allow the opposition to put in a government and take a leading role.
What kind of impact, Aina, is this having on the economy in South Korea?
I don't think it's having a direct impact on the economy at this point, but Samsung obviously is. I mean, they're almost 20% of the GDP that's export GDP. This is a big issue, and it really goes to this issue of these large family-owned companies, these chaebols, who have been dominating the situation. So it's going to be, in the past, it would have been something where the government would have taken action to help save face, start investigations, these types of things. But without that certainty there, it's going to drift.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break right now. Much more on the political crisis in South Korea that could force the president out of office. All that when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.
Looking back, I allowed my guard to drop as she stood by my side during difficult times. I trusted my personal relationship, but was careless and not tough enough with my acquaintances.
Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about the political scandal in South Korea that is threatening President Park. Let's get back to our panel. And Eun-jung, both sides in this political dispute in South Korea are looking at some way of resolving it. Now, one proposal on the table is that President Park cede control of state affairs to a prime minister who would be appointed by the opposition in parliament, because opposition has the majority there. What's the latest on that?
Again, I really have to take a look into what's going on, this weekend, because the things are so fluid as of now. That's one thing I have to highlight. And second thing is These days, even though the opposition party got the majority, but the number is still tricky. The ruling party, even though they are minority, they do have a 129 out of 300,
Right.
which is, if you think about all this calculation, mathematics, is still kind of tricky situations. So, and the opposition party too. Of course, we do have a major two opposition party, Democratic Party and the People's Party, but we do have another party, Justice Party too. So how, they can adjust or coordinate their opinions is still, I think, very vague.
Right.
It's hard to predict.
Okay, numbers aside, politically, would this be fair compromise?
Compromise between, you mean the ruling party and the opposition party?
Between the president and the opposition, yeah.
Again, I do see this kind of tug of war between the Blue House and the National Assembly, and even within her ruling party, we do have more like a fragmented situations.
Right, because the proposal is that President Park would then focus on foreign affairs and the Prime Minister would focus on state affairs.
Yes, but overall, probably, even opposition party also will agree with that kind of, scenario. But who should be the prime minister for the state affair? I think that is really hard as of now, to predict. But again, we do see many of those fragmented situations, even within the ruling party too. President Park Geun-hye's faction still try to advocate her whatever those position, whereas the other group of the factions within the ruling party also disagree with President Park Geun-hye's faction. So again, things are so fluid. Again, I have to, I think, pay attention to what's going on this weekend. After that, probably we can figure out more clearly.
Right. Jin Kai, another security issue. We know that China is strongly opposed to the planned deployment of the U.S. anti-missile system known as THAAD in South Korea. Is that likely to go ahead regardless of how this crisis unfolds?
Well, even President Park's final decision to agree to deploy, not to deploy, but to agree to deploy the THAAD system seems to be a final decisive step in the whole process. But it is actually the United States that has been pushing South Korea government to this final agreement. So it generally will not be affected by the ongoing political crisis. But that might be some kind of a change in the political making process. So, and there is a consensus in South Korean society that is politically correct to deploy THAAD system, and 70% of South Korean population agree.
Okay, G, some analysts are saying that any kind of resignation, if it happens, would create some kind of a vacuum and lead to perhaps even more political turmoil and badly impact the economy. Are those fears, do you think, justified?
I think so, definitely, because she has been kind of hyped up to be the president who will revive the economy. She hasn't done that. If she steps down, it might actually have a negative repercussion.
Aina, how do you think a crisis like this might impact relations with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea?
Well, obviously, they're very excited. Anything that happens bad in South Korea is, in their minds, good for North Korea. They can put it on their propaganda that everything's in disarray. I disagree with my other colleague who's saying that, she can kind of hang on. She might hang on in name, but she's going to have to give up all her powers. These protests are not going to go away. You start looking at her poll numbers, they were down as little as 5%. They're up to about 12% now. It means she's literally just completely gone. And it's just not being things. Now, while national security transcends all the issues that we're talking about, domestic and things like this, there's just simply not a sense of trust. This idea that she was turning to the daughter of a cult leader for advice about national policy issues, secret information was exchanged, is just not palatable. People do not trust her anymore or her judgment.
G, what is your view on the relationship with the DPRK?
Between Park and DPRK,
yeah.
They had to say a lot of colorful things about the president, and of course, she is probably not the person they would want to cooperate with. So in that regard, I think, I have to agree with Anna that they would be happy to hear about the situation in South Korea. And usually what's better for the left wing, I think the North Korean government welcomes.
Right. And what about Anna's point that this has now become a question of trust?
It definitely is, because like I mentioned, I think South Korean people have a high tolerance for corruption because they've seen it throughout the years, but they don't have tolerance for people who are not rational. Because you can expect a president to be corrupt at the expense of their family or their own fortune, but it's mind-boggling for people to think. He was self-sacrificing for daughter of a cult leader who said he can hear her mother's voice. And that's how actually he got into her head, because he said that, well, right after her mom passed away, he said, you know what, I can hear your mom's voice, I can relay you what she has told me.
Jin, you've written about the South Korean relationship with the DPRK. You have said that the DPRK could misjudge what is going on in South Korea right now.
Yes, this is really critical timing. Again, 2 days ago here in the United States, Mr. Trump was elected as the next American president.
Right.
And as I wrote within my op-ed as well, of course, I don't want to see that, but I can guess probably early next year, January or February, before probably President Trump is inaugurated. Probably they might try to test what's going on, what's your reaction from American side, and how closely you guys are still working together with the other Korea, I mean the South Korea. Probably South Korea, the power vacuum might be ongoing. Again, I don't want to see that either. But so that is why I'm very actually concerned about the situations, these fluid situations. Even though I do have a sympathy with my people, but still I hope, all this turmoil can be settled down pretty soon.
Right, a lot of things happening at the same time. In fact, you mentioned Donald Trump. During the election campaign,
yes,
he indicated that as far as security is concerned, South Korea is going to be on its own. But he called President Park, I understand, to reassure her that the United States will still meet all its treaty requirements in terms of protection, in terms of security, etc.
Yes, I'm pretty optimistic and confident with the validity of the Iraq-U.S. alliance. This is not only just about the friendship between the two presidents or anything like that. Rather than that, it has been the institutionalized system for more than 6 decades. So we did have a kind of drama over the 60 years, but we have overcome. So I'm pretty much optimistic with the future of the alliance, but at the same time, my guess is probably we might need to adjust the host nation support. That's what actually candidate Trump was arguing. So probably our government might need to more aggressively negotiating on that side with the new government. But overall, I'm very confident with the Iraq-U.S. alliance.
Jin Kai, do you share that confidence that there won't be too much of a change in the relationship between the United States and South Korea, even under the new president?
Yes, it's quite notable that Donald Trump talked to President Park over the phone just 1 day after he won the presidential election, and President Park reaffirmed the importance of South Korea-U.S. alliance, and Donald Trump responded with this total agreement and full support. So it can be a little bit different from what Donald Trump previously said about the role of U.S. military in the region like East Asia, but this is, of course, understandable. Running for presidency might just be different from being a true president. And I think overall, an instant military power vacuum will not be good for either side of the Iraq-U.S. alliance, and even China is not fully prepared for East Asia. That it truly exclude the role of the United States.
Aina, what is your view? We know that election rhetoric is very different from what we hear once a candidate actually wins and is in office. Do you think there'll be major changes, or will it be more or less business as usual with South Korea?
Well, there's a couple of things that go in South Korea's favor. First off, South Korea pays for 40% of the cost of the U.S., the 28,000 U.S. troops that are stationed there. So it's actually cheaper for the U.S. to keep troops in Korea than it would be if they were at home. So that's one area. But in terms of Donald Trump, it's a Jekyll and Hyde issue. who's going to be the president. We saw Mr. Hyde on the campaign trail. Will he turn into Dr. Jekyll when he becomes president? The difficulty is he's made some very, very strong promises about what he's going to do, how he's going to get money, how he's going to improve, make America great again. But unfortunately, these are not consistent with any kind of rational economic policies. So there's got to be some, he either has to mute it and risk alienating the base that put him in power, or he has to go forward with it and also risk alienating them if there is, in fact, an economic meltdown.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. And of course, we'd like to continue the conversation on social media. Give us your thoughts and comments on our Facebook page. You'll find that at CCTV America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.